You know the sound? That theme song hitting its opening guitar riff, a screen door slamming, somebody yelling that Friday night is the only night that matters. For an entire generation, that's not just a TV cue, that's a reflex. Full House premiered on September 22nd, 1987, and it was part family drama, part stand-up showcase, part walking Hallmark card, all built around a recently widowed sportscaster named Danny Tanner, who brought in backup to raise three daughters alone. Bob Saget played Danny, the cardigan-wearing moral center of the house. John Stamos was Jesse, the motorcycle-riding uncle with more hair product than sense, who almost quit the show before a single episode aired. Dave Coulier was Joey, the best friend turned built-in babysitter and resident impressionist. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, two 11-month-old twins split one toddler role and went on to build one of the most valuable fashion empires in America. Created by Jeff Franklin, produced by Miller Boyett Productions for ABC, the show ran 8 seasons and 192 episodes, got savaged by nearly every critic who touched it, and still became one of the most rerun sitcoms in television history. Today we're going behind the cardigans for 15 facts about Full House you didn't know, the secret audition that decided who'd play America's most famous TV dad, the cast member who tried to get 2 infants fired before they could even walk, and a real-life scandal that lines up almost beat for beat with a 1993 episode about cheating to get into preschool. Before we dive in, hit like and subscribe for more deep dives into the films and shows that shaped us. Let's get into the countdown with number 15. Number 15, the pilot that almost wasn't. Danny Tanner almost had a different face entirely. Full House shot a complete, full-length pilot with actor John Posey in the role before Bob Saget ever set foot on the soundstage. The network's first 2 choices for Danny, Saget and Mad About You's Paul Reiser, were both tied up on other shows at the time, so producers scoured the country for a replacement and cast Posey instead, filming the entire pilot with him in the part. Here's the thing. Creator Jeff Franklin later admitted that pilot actually tested well with audiences overall. Just one detail dragged it down. Posey's character, the straight man holding the whole family together, tested the lowest of anyone in the cast. Then, sometime later, Saget's schedule unexpectedly opened up. Franklin arranged a secret chemistry test on the Perfect Strangers soundstage to compare the 2 actors side by side, and what he saw in that room changed everything that came after it. Bob had no heat, Franklin has said. Bob was not a star yet. He was just a guy on the circuit trying to get going. But there was a spark, a small one, the kind you can't put in a casting memo or quantify on a test audience scorecard. Franklin fought to scrap a finished pilot that had already tested fine and reshoot the entire thing from scratch, on a hunch about one unscripted moment nobody outside that room ever saw. The young cast had already bonded with Posey during filming. They were upset when he got replaced. None of them had any idea they were about to spend the next 8 years of their lives calling someone else dad. Number 14, the reviews that should have sunk it. Critics wanted this show gone before it had a chance. The Los Angeles Times' Howard Rosenberg wrote that the pilot oozed and blubbered for 30 minutes straight with no laughs to speak of, joking that a Geiger counter couldn't find anything worth measuring in the broadcast. The New York Times said the cast looked like they were frantically trying to keep the family's infant from becoming a full-fledged corpse, a line so harsh it still gets quoted in retrospectives decades later. Rotten Tomatoes retroactively scores that entire first season at a brutal 40% approval, and the ratings backed the critics up at first. Full House finished 71st in the Nielsen rankings its debut year, buried in a bad 8 o'clock time slot, with no strong lead-in to protect it from the channel surfers. Here's the wild part. ABC didn't pull the plug. They moved the show to Friday nights, slotted it right behind the established hit Perfect Strangers, and let the audience find it on its own terms, episode by episode, season by season. By season 3, Full House was a fixture in Nielsen's top 30. By seasons 5 and 6, it was cracking the top 10 outright, ahead of shows critics had actually praised. The show one national critic couldn't stand, went on to become one of the most rerun, most syndicated sitcoms in American television. Audiences never read the reviews. They just kept showing up, week after week, for 8 straight years. Number 13, the boyfriend who was secretly a Disney prince. DJ's boyfriend was secretly voicing a Disney legend. Scott Weinger first appeared on Full House in a single season. 5 episodes as a one-off guest character named Steve Peters, then returned the following season as a different, similarly named character, Steve Hale, introduced in the season 6 premiere and kept on as a full series regular who eventually became DJ's primary love interest for years of the show's run. Off-camera, Weinger has said he actually won the role of Aladdin in Disney's 1992 animated film before he ever landed the regular gig on Full House, and that he was already a series regular on the sitcom by the time the movie hit theaters. 2 of the biggest things happening in Weinger's career, the steady boyfriend on America's favorite family sitcom, and the voice of a Disney leading man, were overlapping almost exactly. And almost nobody connected the 2 at the time, since the credits for an animated film and a live-action sitcom rarely cross paths in anyone's mind. Weinger has said it still blows people's minds all these years later, when fans finally put it together. And weirdly, the show leaned into the coincidence once, just barely. In one Full House episode, set during a family trip to Disney World, DJ daydreams about Steve dressed as Aladdin, a wink that nobody outside the writer's room would have understood as anything more than a cute reference. It wasn't really a reference at all. It was a teenager on television quietly living 2 entirely separate double lives. One in a cardigan, one in a vest and harem pants, somehow keeping both wardrobes straight at once. Number 12, the finale. Nobody planned. The ending almost didn't happen the way you remember it, because the ending almost didn't happen at all. In 1995, ABC canceled Full House despite the show still ranking in the Nielsen Top 25, citing the rising costs of producing an 8-person ensemble in its final seasons. But there was a lifeline waiting in the wings. The newly launched WB network wanted Full House to anchor its entire lineup for 2 more seasons, a deal that would have kept the Tanners on the air well into the late 90s and given the writers room to actually plan an ending. Negotiations dragged on for weeks, got close, and then collapsed at the last possible minute, with no warning to the people who'd built their careers on the show. Here's the kicker. The collapse happened so late in the process that the writers had no real runway left to build a proper farewell at all. There was no time to write to the finale, Andrea Barber later admitted in an interview. Jodie Sweetin put it even more bluntly at a fan convention years afterward. We didn't really have a lot of time to say goodbye. So the show that spent 8 seasons building toward earned emotional send-offs for every single character ended instead on a plot nobody had time to plan. Michelle falls off a horse and loses her memory. That's the finale. Not because the writers chose it, and not because it fit the story they'd been telling for 8 years. Because a network deal fell apart in a conference room none of the actors on screen ever saw coming. Number 11, the loudest character, played by the quietest person. The actress playing the loudest character on the show was the quietest person in the room. Andrea Barber joined Full House as Kimmy Gibbler, DJ's next-door neighbor. All bad fashion choices and louder-than-life confidence written straight onto the page, a character built to fill every silence in a scene. In real life, Barber has written that she was the near-total opposite, terrified of red carpets, physically sick before interviews every single time, with no one around her quite understanding why. She described it as anxiety she didn't even have a name for yet, back when she was still a teenager working full-time on a hit sitcom and smiling through every public appearance anyway. So, when Full House ended in 1995, Barber didn't chase more spotlight, more auditions, more momentum off the back of the show's success. She walked away from acting almost entirely, earned a bachelor's degree in English literature, then a master's degree in women's studies overseas, and stayed out of Hollywood for roughly 2 decades, a quieter life by deliberate choice. The only thing that ever pulled her back was the one role built furthest from who she actually is. When Jeff Franklin called in 2014 about a reboot, she said yes on the spot, no second-guessing at all. Together, the loudest character on the call sheet and the quietest actress on the lot did something the rest of the ensemble never managed. Prove that the person you see on camera and the person actually living that life can be nearly total opposites, and the audience never has to find out. Number 10, the 6-episode guest star who never left. Becky was only ever supposed to stick around for 6 episodes. Lori Loughlin was cast as Danny's new morning show co-host on Wake Up San Francisco, a short guest arc with no plans behind it to expand into anything bigger. She wasn't even meant to be a love interest. But the chemistry between Becky and Jesse tested so well with audiences that producers kept finding reasons to write her back in, episode after episode, season after season, until cutting her loose stopped being an option anyone seriously considered. By season 4, Becky wasn't a guest star anymore. She'd married into the Tanner family on screen, becoming the only adult woman in the regular cast. By season 5, she had twin sons of her own, with Jesse, written permanently into the fabric of a household she was never meant to stay in past her first 6 scripts. A 6-episode guest arc quietly became 8 years, a wedding, and 2 more children added to the family tree. Hold on to that thought, because this is the actress who's about to give us the single most jaw-dropping fact on this entire list. And it starts with the one role nobody, including the show itself, ever originally planned to keep around for more than a month and a half of filming. Number 9, the uncle who got the babies fired. John Stamos got 2 11-month-old infants fired from the show. During production on the pilot, Stamos and Dave Coulier filmed a scene changing the baby playing Michelle Tanner, hosing her down in the kitchen sink and wrapping her in paper towels for the shot, while a fan dried her off between takes. And the twins cast in the role would not stop crying take after take after take. "I couldn't deal with it," Stamos later admitted on a podcast long after the show had made him famous. He gave creator Jeff Franklin an ultimatum, point blank. "It's either me or them." The babies were pulled from the production within days. Here's the thing. Their replacements, a different set of twins entirely, were calm and quiet on set exactly like he'd asked for, and Stamos hated them anyway, describing them bluntly in his own memoir as homely. Turns out, quiet wasn't actually the assignment. Within a matter of days, the original twins were brought back into the role. Those original twins were Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen. The man who fought to get them fired before they could even walk would go on to spend 8 full seasons on a hit show built around them, while the twins he tried to replace went on to build one of the most successful fashion empires on the planet. Quick pause. Who's your favorite Full House character? And which fact on this list has surprised you the most so far? Drop it in the comments below and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next deep dive. Now, back to the countdown. Number 8, the table read. That almost ended it all. John Stamos almost quit before the cameras ever started rolling. He's said the show was originally pitched to him as something closer to bosom buddies, 2 grown adults sharing an apartment, with kids treated as background noise, barely worth mentioning in the pitch meeting. He came in off a run on General Hospital, feeling, in his own words, like a big shot, expecting the table read to confirm it. Then came the first table read for the pilot. Stamos has said that when 5-year-old Jodie Sweetin delivered her very first lines as Stephanie, the entire room laughed so hard nobody could even hear his dialogue underneath it. Line after line, completely buried under laughter, aimed at a kindergartner. He slunk down lower and lower in his chair, walked straight out to a payphone the second the read-through ended, and called his agent on the spot. "Get me off the show," he said. No hesitation, no second thoughts in the moment. He fought the casting decision for a long time afterward, refusing to let it go easily, even as production moved forward around him. Then, something quietly shifted in him. "I finally said, what am I doing? It's a beautiful show. We built this with sweetness and kindness." Years later, Stamos put it even simpler than that. "The central character was love," he said. The actor who tried to quit on day 1, over a 5-year-old stealing his scene out from under him, became the cast member most publicly devoted to defending the show's legacy for the next 4 decades. Number 7, the gamble nobody could prove. Jeff Franklin gambled the entire production on a hunch nobody could actually prove. Remember that secret chemistry test from Fact 15? Franklin had to fight studio executives hard to justify reshooting a pilot that had already tested fine with real audiences, purely because of how Saget felt standing next to Posey in one unscripted moment on an empty soundstage. It was expensive. Full pilots aren't cheap to shoot once, let alone twice. And reshooting one meant burning through a budget the studio had already signed off on once. Jodie Sweetin later said Franklin had to fight so hard just to make the reshoot happen at all, going up against executives who'd already seen a finished working product. His reasoning wasn't built on data, focus groups, or test scores, the kind of evidence that usually wins arguments in network meetings. It was pure instinct, the kind no studio note can really argue with or against. "I just know it," Franklin has said. "I just know this is who we need as the dad." He turned out to be right, but only because nobody in that room was willing or able to actually tell him no. Number 6. The kid who never auditioned. The one actress who never had to formally audition ended up with the hardest road once the show wrapped for good. Jodie Sweetin was cast as Stephanie Tanner without a traditional audition process at all. Franklin had already seen her work as a young child actress on the sitcom Valerie and wanted her in the role from the very start, before most of the rest of the family had even been fully cast or confirmed. Years after the show ended, Sweetin spoke openly and repeatedly, in interviews and in her own memoir, about struggling for years with substance abuse, a period of her life she's since described as the hardest and loneliest stretch she ever lived through, all while the public still pictured her exactly as she'd looked on the show, a wide-eyed kid in a kitchen sitcom frozen in syndicated reruns. She got sober, became a public advocate for others going through the same thing, and returned for Fuller House as a visibly different, more grounded person than the one tabloids had spent years writing about during the worst of it. The kid who never had to prove herself in a casting room ended up proving something far harder in public years later, entirely on her own terms. Number 5. The twins who said no. The twins Stamos once tried to get fired are the only original cast members who said no to coming back, and after that last fact, you're probably ready for one with a little less heartbreak in it. When Fuller House launched on Netflix in February 2016, nearly the entire original ensemble returned, some as full leads, others for guest appearances, and quick walk-ons scattered across the 5-season run. Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen didn't return at all, not even for a single scene, not even a wordless cameo in a crowd shot. By then, they'd built their own fashion label and had zero professional interest in stepping back in front of a camera for a reunion built on a kind of nostalgia they'd long since aged out of needing. Online speculation filled the gap almost immediately, with some fans assuming the twins had simply been left off the call sheet entirely or never properly asked. Stamos shut that rumor down publicly himself, insisting it was entirely their own choice to stay away, not a snub from the production. The two performers who once couldn't stop crying through a single take on a soundstage, the two babies an uncle once tried to get replaced before they could even sit up on their own, became the only two members of the entire cast with enough leverage and enough distance from the role to simply decline the whole project without ever needing to explain themselves. Number 4. The uncle's hidden rock bottom. The cast member most associated with stability needed a public crisis to actually find his own. In 2015, John Stamos was arrested for driving under the influence, an arrest that made national headlines almost instantly given his squeaky clean reputation. He's said that he went straight home that same night and drank an entire bottle of wine just to forget what had happened to him hours earlier, alone, with nobody there to stop him. He was sentenced to 3 years of probation, a court-ordered alcohol program, and dozenas of mandatory support meetings, the kind of consequence that doesn't fit neatly into a sitcom plot or a tabloid headline. He's since admitted he kept drinking on a film set right after the arrest, traveling north of the border to start a new project, just to avoid sitting alone with what he'd actually done. It took years, and that one public humiliating moment before he finally got sober and wrote candidly about it in a later memoir, in detail he'd never gone near in any interview before that point. The actor playing the most easygoing, dependable uncle on television spent decades quietly fighting something the cameras never once showed. Number 3. The creator behind the curtain. Number 3. The man who built America's wholesomest TV family was fired for running one of the least wholesome rooms in town. Jeff Franklin came back to showrun the Fuller House revival, and Warner Brothers opened a formal investigation into his on-set conduct as early as 2016. Years before most of the public ever heard his name connected to anything but the Tanners and a 30-year run of family-friendly hits. A second, larger investigation followed in 2017, built on complaints from multiple staffers describing a toxic writer's room and a pattern of inappropriate comments toward female employees, including how he handled requests for time off around pregnancies. In February 2018, the studio terminated Franklin's production deal entirely and removed him from the show he'd created more than 30 years earlier, cutting ties with the franchise that had built his entire career. He later sued his successor, Brian Behar, claiming the allegations had been exaggerated or fabricated to advance someone else's career at his expense. A judge dismissed that lawsuit outright in 2023, citing insufficient evidence to support his claims, and noting the statements at issue were protected as part of a legitimate workplace investigation. The creator, who spent 3 decades selling the country on warmth, kindness, and family, was found by his own studio's sworn investigators to have built something far closer to the opposite of it behind closed doors. Number 2. The Dad with Two Faces. The most beloved TV dad in America was living a double life the entire time, and most fans only found out the hard way, years after the show had already ended. Bob Saget called it himself in a memoir he published decades into his career, a beautiful Jekyll and Hyde experience. Clean-cut Danny Tanner in front of the camera, lecturing his daughters about honesty and curfews, and one of the rawest, most unfiltered stand-up comedians working anywhere off it, the moment the cameras stopped rolling. He said the contradiction was exactly how he survived 8 years playing a character who was almost nothing like the person he actually was off stage. Later film and stand-up audiences would barely recognize the connection at all. On January 9, 2022, Saget was found dead in a hotel room after an accidental fall at 65 years old in the middle of a stand-up tour. The outpouring that followed wasn't just sadness for a comedian whose later career many fans had never even seen. Millions of people who'd grown up watching him say goodnight to 3 daughters every Friday night were mourning someone who, by his own description, had to work hard just to become that gentle, patient person at all, week after week, season after season. Number 1. The episode that predicted real life. Aunt Becky stopped a school cheating scandal on the show. Then, years later, she lived one out for real. In the 1993 episode, Be True to Your Preschool, Jesse lies about his twin sons' academic abilities to get them into an elite, exclusive preschool, and it's Becky who comes clean about the lying during the boys' actual admission interview, ending the scheme in a tidy half hour with a lesson learned and a hug before the credits roll. In March 2019, federal prosecutors charged Lori Loughlin and her husband, fashion designer Massimo Giannulli, with conspiracy after the couple paid roughly $500,000 in bribes to fraudulently get their 2 daughters into the University of Southern California as fake crew team recruits, neither of whom had ever rode competitively. Fans noticed the parallel within hours of the news breaking, flooding social media with side-by-side clips of the old episode. Loughlin eventually pleaded guilty, served 2 months in a federal prison, and never appeared in Fuller House's 5th and final season at all, having last appeared on the show the year before the charges were filed. There was no tidy resolution this time, no hug before the credits rolled, no lesson cleanly learned by Act 3. The actress who spent 8 years playing the voice that stopped the scam on screen lived out almost the exact same plot for real. Except this time, the scheme actually worked for years before it unraveled. The consequences were permanent, and nobody wrote her a clean way out by the end of the episode. And there you have it. 15 facts about Full House. A pilot that almost starred someone else entirely, decided by a secret test on a soundstage nobody outside that room ever saw. A creator who bet his whole show on a feeling he couldn't put into words, and won. 2 infants who got fired before they could even walk, and went on to build one of the most successful fashion empires on the planet. And an actress who spent 1 season stopping a scam on television before living through a real one decades later, with no script and no 22-minute resolution waiting at the end. Full House spent 8 years selling America on the idea that families forgive each other no matter what, that every single problem gets solved cleanly by the time the credits roll and the hug happens. The people who actually made that show didn't always get that same clean ending in their own lives, on or off camera. So tell us, which of these 15 facts genuinely surprised you the most? Did you already know about the secret audition on the Perfect Strangers stage, or did the Aunt Becky parallel hit you hardest of all? Drop your answer in the comments below. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what we've got coming next. Until next time.